Imagine this. You're on a battlefield in the early 1800s, where tensions are so thick you could cut them with a sword. Cannons are poised, soldiers brace themselves, and generals await the signal to plunge their nations into a bloody conflict. But what if I told you one small object prevented all that chaos? The most powerful weapon turned out not to be a cannon, a musket, or even the sharpest of swords. No, it was a spyglass, a simple, handheld telescope that saved thousands of lives and reshaped history as we know it. This is the little-known story of the spyglass that ended a war. You won't believe it, but this iconic piece of history dates back to the Napoleonic Wars. The story begins on a bright yet tension-filled morning in 1813. Two vast armies, one led by Napoleon Bonaparte and the other by a coalition of feuding nations, stood on the verge of an epic battle that would change Europe forever. Napoleon's army was outnumbered, but he was as confident as ever. Across the valley, one of the coalition generals peered into the distance, desperately seeking weaknesses in Napoleon's lines. This general, whose identity remains somewhat obscure even to historians, was handed a spyglass by his aide. Through the glass, the general could see something odd. Napoleon's army wasn't moving in its usual aggressive formation. There were gaps in their ranks, disorganized tents, signs that their supplies hadn't arrived. They were vulnerable. Instead of using this advantage to launch an attack, the general did something extraordinary. He called a temporary halt to the offensive and sent a messenger under a flag of truce to propose negotiations. Napoleon, recognizing his army's disadvantage, reluctantly agreed. A full-scale battle was avoided. A few weeks later, the coalition and Napoleon reached a temporary ceasefire that saved thousands of lives on both sides. It turns out that spyglass gave the general just enough intel to make this critical decision. The stained, brass-framed instrument was later inscribed and preserved as a symbol of wisdom in warfare. It's currently housed quietly in a museum, far from the crowds you'd expect for such a significant artifact. This tiny lens on history reminds us, sometimes avoiding conflict shows more courage than charging into one. And often, it's not brute force, but clear vision, both literally and figuratively, that leads to progress. Next time you hear about history-changing inventions, don't just think big, think small.